This podcast is not intended to and does not create a client-therapist relationship between the AllPro Mindset hosts, Jason Frabel or Dr. Aaron Sapio, and any other person. Although tips for incorporating mindfulness interventions into your daily life are offered, this podcast is not a group therapy session and is not intended to take the place of therapeutic intervention.
You're listening to Doc and Coach on AllPro Mindset, where we interview professionals, explore positive outlooks, and make connections to our own lives. Being that this is our 10th show, our setup tonight is a little bit different. We have our guest in our studio tonight, so we are audio recording and we are video recording the show to put on YouTube. So since our guest is in the station for the whole show, feel free to call in at any time to join the conversation. The number is 856-345-9988.
So welcome this evening, listeners. Basic introduction, although I don't think it's basic by any means. So here we go. Reporter turned crime fighter is saving Camden, New Jersey from what seemed like an endless downward spiral. Dan Keashen is the Superman of the city of Camden. Dan is passionate about crime, education, and economic development. He wanted to be directly involved in public policy. The 9-mile stretch of Camden is exactly where Dan wants to be. After leaving his position as a reporter for the Philadelphia City paper and the Journal Register Company, the mayor of Cherry Hill offered him a position as a director of communications in 2006. In 2011, the county created the Regional Police Department. In 2012, Dan joined the Freeholder Board and was directly involved in operating and creating the Camden County Police Department. Dan is responsible for Camden County's press and press-related issues. He has strategically worked with media outlets to garner national press for the Camden County Police Department, Camden County's elected officials, Camden County and city's mayor and council, and is responsible for ensuring that the county's message is appropriately delivered and received. Media contacts in recent press includes New York Times, CNN, Anderson Cooper, National Public Radio, Rolling Stone Magazine, Huffington Post, the Foreign Press Corps, local and national affiliates of NBC, CBS, Fox, and ABC, and most recently, the White House Press Office of President Obama's visit to the city of Camden and the Camden County Police Department on May 18, 2015. So, with all this being said, we are extremely privileged and honored to have Dan Keashen here this evening with us.
Well, thanks for having me, guys. It's a pleasure to be here. I got to tell you, it's different for me because a lot of what I do, for the most part, is to put other people in front of the camera to speak. So I don't get to talk about myself a lot, and I'm really happy to be here.
Thank you. We are honored.
Definitely welcome. So tonight we're talking about seeking the truth and asking the tough questions. And there's many times and opportunities where we have to ask tough questions. We have to ask questions when we know that it's going to be uncomfortable for other people. That makes it a difficult question to ask. We know that when we're going to ask a question that's going to threaten a person's autonomy, that's going to be a tough question to ask. Whenever we're going to threaten another person's sense of control. So if we ask something that could potentially be off-putting to them, it's going to be a really, really tough question. So anytime I think the relationship between the asker and the askee is at risk, that's a tough question. And it seems like in your position, both as a reporter and now with the freeholders, I mean, you have to ask a lot of difficult questions.
Yeah, it's pretty interesting. I mean, my dad set a very good standard for me early on, and basically that was when I was young and didn't know my way about the world. He basically said, listen, all you can do is ask, and the worst thing somebody can say is no. So basically I took that small saying and I tried to build a career around it, and first as a reporter, and I think right now, especially, it's a very important time for people to be asking tough questions and holding their elected officials responsible for and making them accountable. And I think I know I tried to do that at a local level, working in the city of Philadelphia at times with different agencies as a reporter, and then ironically, now I get asked tough questions. Reporters come to me, and they do have tough questions for me to answer. But the thing is, again, going back to all anybody could ever say is no when you ask that question, whatever the question may be, whether it's about your tax bill or national security. It really comes back to what I think is the, let's just call it, intestinal fortitude to be able to ask the question, because I think there are so many people that I run into on a regular basis that are just don't have the courage to shake up the apple cart a little bit and ask those tough questions.
Yeah, I think that the confidence piece is huge, because if you're not sure what you're asking and you're not prepared for the answer, then people don't want to ask it. They get really, am I going to be challenged by asking this question? So then that kind of holds them back.
Absolutely. I think that, there's certainly there's a confidence to it. There's confidence, courage, again, fortitude to move forward with something. Plenty of people don't like change. I'd say the majority of people probably don't like change. I saw this in so many different iterations in public service, whether it was starting a new police department in Camden, which was really groundbreaking and unprecedented in the state of New Jersey, and I would argue a lot of the country, to changing someone's recycle bucket, right? I mean, people just are adverse to change, and asking tough questions can create that change.
Yeah, I mean, when I was thinking about questions and how you ask questions and what kind of questions, I thought about, or one of the things I read was that your questions really should accelerate progress, and they should create change, really. You shouldn't ask a question that would stunt a process. You want it to move things along, and you need to have that momentum with it.
Without a doubt. I mean, I think, from what I can speak to now is 11 years in public service. What people should be, and this goes for the the resident to what I would call the fourth estate, or reporters trying to hold everybody accountable, asking those questions that keep everybody honest is extremely important, and that's questions of your police department, questions of your fire department. Nobody should ever be offended by someone asking why. And that's totally okay, and that's something I deal with, like KYW 2, 3, 4 times a day. I'm dealing with that, those questions, which are healthy.
I'm wondering if there was something along the way in becoming, director of communications in Camden County that you would consider your biggest challenge to kind of rise to that status.
Well, I think part of my job, and one of the reasons my job is pretty, to a certain degree challenging, is that, I get questions and they come from all different directions every day in some facet of what we do. Now, remember, we do everything from supply flu shots to police the streets of, a very high volume challenged city. Probably one of the most, active police departments in the entire state of New Jersey. So, I can get, I can tell you, I've been dealing with a lot of questions on the opioid crisis right now. What are elected officials doing? What are people in power and stakeholders in the community doing to fight the opioid epidemic? We're gonna be working with the DEA tomorrow in a community forum. I mean, we're talking about really big issues, and then question wise, there's also questions of how much we spend on deer carcass removal. So it spans the spectrum, and I never know what the any given day will bring. Usually it's highly unlikely that any day would mirror another. So there's never no 2 days are ever the same. But it's it's fun, and the time moves really quick.
Yeah, I'm sure your days fly by.
They fly by, and it's good. It's a healthy, fast movement, and it's a movement that you're never bored by.
So you were quoted as saying, follow the truth and ask a tough question, which is really this evening's focus. As a personal Hunter S. Thompson, fan, he was quoted as saying, journalism is a style of reporting based on what he considered William Faulkner's idea that the best fiction is far more true than any kind of journalism. So when I'm looking at that specific quote or statement and where you're coming from and this evening and focused on those tough questions, it seems that crafting the right or tough question is obviously critical to getting to the truth. I'm wondering if there's maybe a specific formula that you use, in approaching that, or has it over time evolved into something maybe a little more kind of intuitive and adaptable in the situation?
Yeah, so that great question, right? And yeah, Hunter S. Thompson, and I'm absolutely a fan. Funny digressing story here for a second about Hunter S. Thompson. Hunter S. Thompson really, his best work, his biggest work was done in Rolling Stone magazine. Mm-hmm. And Rolling Stone really had to work hard to recruit him. And because at the time he was running for sheriff of, I believe, North Aspen, Colorado, in a very probably bizarre, well, actually by today's standards, probably a very normal way, considering what just happened. But with all that said, Rolling Stone, the editor of Rolling Stone, basically said to him, he told him, "Look, I can't work for you right now. I can't write for you. I'm busy with this election." He says, "Well, why don't you write about that?" And so I say that because for me, doing something I know, right, being a reporter, having an idea of what I need out of somebody good in the position that I sit in right now, what are the sourcing, what are the statistics, what can make my job as easy as possible as a reporter, how can I be good at that, and knowing and taking that experience of being a reporter and then putting it in the place I'm in today is basically like somebody asking me, "Well, yeah, why don't you write about that? Because that's something you know about."
Right.
So I don't know if that gets to the
yeah,
point
no,
of
it
your
does.
question.
It does. Yeah.
But it's ultimately, I think I'm a practitioner. I'm a professional. I've been in this seat now for 11 years, as in I've left journalism, and I've been out of the industry for about 11 years, but I can tell you that some of my I have like I'm a huge fan of reporters. I'm a huge fan of the work they do. I admire it, knowing what goes into it, especially the really comprehensive work that takes a little while to get through and read, but ultimately makes a tremendous impact and can change industry, can change government, can change a whole host of different things. Really being the watchdog over all of our institutions and making sure they stay fair to the public and accountable. But yeah, I mean, it's been a while. But I if I was collecting, if somebody, if reporters were baseball cards, I would have the whole collection. I'd love, knowing these people and what they have to go through and how they practice their craft, and that ultimately makes me better at my job.
Now, the confirmation bias is an idea that people tend to find the information that confirms their beliefs, and so they ignore the information that tends to challenge their beliefs. So do you ever find that difficult when you're either answering when you're answering questions of a reporter or journalist who's trying to find out what's going on now?
So that's a great question, right? Because, one of the things we deal with in policing today is implicit bias. So confirmation bias is obviously all the rage at this point. And one of the reasons is because we have, unfortunately, it seems like we have become disinterested in facts to a certain degree, or the general public has, and they're just looking, whether they're going through their Facebook feed or their Twitter feed, and digesting content that feeds that bias, no matter where it comes from. And we've seen 100 different ways that just occurred over the last election cycle. And so, for me personally, I try to look at mainstream media. Mainstream media, I know reporters that have basically, much like James Comey did, stopped, didn't affiliate with a political party, didn't participate in elections because they didn't want to be seen as biased in any way, shape, or form. Now, these are people that are going to vote, right? These are people that, the sanctity of this country is built on an anonymous ballot, basically. So you don't ever have to worry about someone using that as bias. But ultimately, what we've seen is we've seen reporters demonized. A lot of this bias, has been fed by a public kind of looking for someone to confirm their beliefs, no matter who it is, whether it's right or wrong or factual or misinformation. They're still digesting it. And I think that's a major problem in this country right now.
Yeah, it's hard. And I mean, when you think about people's, in general, attention span and how quickly they're listening, they're looking for bites, news bites, so they can only handle a bite at a time. So I would think that as a person who's answering questions, you have to think, how succinctly can I give them a bite that's going to give them a broad idea of what's happening? I would think that that's really, really hard for anybody who's answering questions.
Yeah.
Is, how am I going to pack it into a small news bite?
So I try to be concise, right? And I don't necessarily like that. I mean, I would really like to explain it.
Right. That's how people get the broad picture.
Exactly. And listen, it wasn't always this way. There was a period of time where everybody read the newspaper, and I'm still somebody that picks up a hard copy of a newspaper and reads it, and it might be multiple newspapers depending on the day. I do consume, on my phone, on my desktop, on my tablet, but ultimately for me, knowing that Philadelphia had the Evening Bulletin, the Philadelphia Inquirer, the Daily News, and if you look at the papers in New York City, every borough had a morning and an afternoon printed paper.
Wow. Yeah.
So, people consumed and they read. And unfortunately, and there was never a question. And listen, not every newspaper publisher was completely objective. I'd say, there's probably you could probably find some biased newspaper publishers now, but the fact of the matter is that no one is consuming any more than a soundbite, and that's dangerous for society. I don't think a well-informed public is really part of the strength of our democracy. For sure.
Yeah, and one thing that's coming to mind in listening and being out in the public eye and networking and building, I'm assuming that there's a lot of relationship building. I know that you are, highly interested in these policy changes and making changes in many ways. So how important is it to be an effective leader and really build leadership and relationships for influencing change?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. It's one of these things where relationship building is paramount. And I just spoke at Rutgers the other day to a group of kids, mostly juniors and seniors some seniors getting ready to graduate. It's critical for I would say anyone to build relationships, and it is, networking is so important. I mean, it plays a role, and it opens doors, and it provides opportunity that you wouldn't have otherwise. Now, in my role, relationship building is tremendously important. I mean, if I hold a press conference, you can't just reach out and think that putting a press advisory and letting it go into the ether of assignment editors and not knowing anyone will provide you with coverage of whatever you're talking about. You have to physically be interacting and developing positive relationships where they know this is a transaction that they're going to get something out of. And you're coming with accountability and credibility to the table. And so that's extremely important when you build relationships. People need to know that you're first and foremost real, substantive, and can deliver in regards to whatever that relationship is built out of.
Yeah, and a lot of what Doc and myself do, whether it's working with a team or working with an individual, counseling, therapy, performance related, the foundation is the relationship. If we're going to move forward, and we're going to move in any way, we're going to plant seeds or do anything that is impacting them on any level, it starts with the relationship, and at its roots, really being authentic, being genuine, and feeling there's a degree of trust in that.
Imperative. Trust is, if I could take this back to Camden for a second, our whole, the whole body of work we're doing there now for over the last 4 years is in many ways community policing. Prior to Ferguson was more like, well, we've got a couple officers, we have them in the community policing unit. Whereas in Camden, in order to build trust, in order to make gains in the neighborhoods, our officers knock on doors. Our officers are interacting with kids. They go into the schools and they read to 6 and 7 year olds. They build relationships. They're networking with the community every day. And in Camden, right now, this year, we've had 3 homicides.
3 homicides.
That's it.
Wow.
That's it. So this time last year, there were 16. And really, over the course of the last 30 years, the average at this point in the year is usually 15 to 20. So, our officers, and that's not to say that's progress, right? I'm not saying everything is great and we're done and we're going to wrap up and this whole crime thing is over in Camden. But we've made a lot of progress.
Oh, yeah.
And that progress is built on the foundation. I'd say the bedrock of that foundation is relationships, is connecting with the community and bridging the gaps that existed, because we know prior there were significant gaps. There was no interaction or very little. And the community didn't feel comfortable talking to officers. So based on those relationships, you get things like information. People know who's doing crime in the city. They're more apt to come and talk to an officer about it. People know that this one corner is populated by a certain drug set and they're dealing heroin that's killing people. Now they're coming to us and they're telling us. And we can set up an operation to dismantle that and make sure that poison doesn't go on the street. So relationships are vitally important over, I'd say they're transformative over every professional, every line of employment, basically.
And Doc, we've touched on that when we had Darrell Weber on, who talked about creating a winning culture, and again, across the board, at its, like, as you're stating, the bedrock of that foundation is those relationships. He said if you were going in and you were going to build, a program from bottom up, it was, well, I'm first going in and assessing what I have. It's not, while I do have a plan and a vision and a trajectory, I'm also going in with open eyes and ears and listening to what listening to what I'm hearing, and also observing what I'm seeing, and using that assessment piece to incorporate that into my vision in moving forward.
Well, yeah, there's no question. I think, one of the things that we haven't mentioned yet too, and that is, so that's part of leadership. And then on top of that leadership is there to build a culture. And so if you're lucky enough to have a situation that we did where we were able to build out a brand new department and bring in, all these young, the median terms of service for our guys right now is 3 years.
Wow.
So that compares to about 14 years for the average police officer in the state of New Jersey. Right. So we were able to sculpt this culture that is permeated, and we've backed it and compounded it with training a lot of training, much more training than the average officer would get in 95% of municipalities throughout the state or police departments, and that has created, so that has facilitated and created the piece to the puzzle that's so important, which is getting guys out to actually make human contact.
Mm-hmm.
And how many times have you been out and you've seen a police officer and they're either their windows are up, they're in their patrol vehicle, and they're driving right by? And this could be in Marlton or it could be in Camden.
Mm-hmm.
The fact of the matter is there's no connection made, and in fact, when you look at the big picture, a lot of people they become almost resentful that the police aren't doing anything because there is no interaction.
Mm-hmm.
And that's that's not, I think the future of policing is built off a number of things, but a big one is community policing and building relationships with the community. Something that was done, I think, in the 1950s and 60s that we got very far away from over the last, maybe 30 or 40 years.
Yeah, there's you're talking about a process. I know that in that training it's saying that you're really created this atmosphere or this fertile ground for these guys to come in and to really intensely put them through this formalized training. And we, Doc, we've talked a lot about at different points a process. I know that when we were talking about training just with the lawyer, and going through that, bringing in these kind of young lawyers who, finishing law school, and, how do we get them comfortable and prepared, to go enter into the court system and feel good about where they're at. So, and we've touched, like I said, on this multiple times, that if we're going to do it, we have to generate this path and this system for them to get plugged into and to move them faster. It's not enough just to say, hey, you're on board, figure it out.
Mm-hmm.
No, we're leading it. So that in essence is effective leadership. So you're creating a system, you're building relationships with these new officers coming in. They in turn are then going out and building relationships out in the community. So it's widespread, and I've seen articles time and time again that talk about, what is it that creates a great culture or a great company. And across the board, it's not this top down. There is communication on all levels across the board, and they've found that to be the most effective means of getting the best results.
Yeah, I think that's right. I mean, I think, in policing it's a little different just because it's a paramilitary operation. So you guys are they interact well with one another. I play on the Camden Police hockey team, and there's I think good camaraderie there across the board, and they're all communicating with one another. Of course, on the flip side, there are going to be times when you get a set of orders and you have to follow through on them because they're critical to somebody saving someone's life or doing something that's going to be extremely helpful to the community. Now, I will get back to one quick point, and I know I'd be remiss if we didn't talk about it. Is that unlike, I think this culture, this community policing culture also lends a hand to be a little bit more thoughtful with the very, very important powers of arresting someone and having a badge and a gun, and what that means to the larger community itself. So what I mean by that is, when our officers are going out there, they're not being measured by how many tickets they write. That's actually something that will raise red flags with commanders or superiors. With guys will be looked at as, what are you doing? What kind of tickets are these? And you give somebody who is making less than $13,000 a year a ticket, that is financially crippling to them. So the question is, are you making your community stronger by doing that? So obviously we're not talking about letting flagrant crime go or anything of that nature, but I think there comes periods of time where we Camden's it's still a very physically challenged place. A high rate of poverty amongst the population, almost 40%, and while that is changing and getting better, and there's some transformative economic development going on within the city, as police officers, we have to be cognizant of that. You're not going to see us, we're not going to be setting up, checkpoints to see if people have their inspection stickers, up to date, because that doesn't serve us by handing somebody a $250 or $400 ticket. That doesn't help our residents, advance in any way.
So you've used the term community policing. So is this the actual model? Like, is that a coined model and kind of mapped out for the training and the approach?
Yeah. So community policing is kind of a catch-all, right? It's been the model itself is built around community policing. It's very descriptive in regards to what we do. Jay was talking about some of the individuals that go through this process. 6 months in the academy, another 3 months of FTO program, which is our field training officer program. Then, so now we've invested 9 months of training into you, and we put you out on the street. And then from there, we're still investing training in you after that as officers. But, I think ultimately, community policing is kind of a catch-all, but it aptly describes, really, again, that bedrock of where that standard that's created very early on with officers and what they do every day.
I think it's great. It really kind of looks at building positivity and building resilience in the community rather than just kind of locking down the bad. Like, it's kind of opening the door to how to make a better path in front of you. So it's building instead of locking. I think. Great
point. I mean, we've seen mass incarceration done in cities all across America, and actually basically everywhere across America, and it doesn't work. It doesn't work. You can't arrest your way out of problems, and you have to focus. You have to take a broader viewpoint, and you have to be more thoughtful on how you use your powers for good. And the question becomes, at the end of the day, how can you move the community forward?
Yeah.
And you can't do it when you're locking people up on a above average basis.
Yeah, even in a school system, when I look at discipline, sometimes I roll my eyes and I'm like, we're cutting the lawn. All we're doing is cutting the grass, when really we need to dig up the weeds and reseed. And it seems like that's what's going on, that you're digging up the weeds and you're getting to reseed so that what's growing is just a healthier community.
Yeah, it's true. I mean, discipline in schools, I mean, have we ever really taken a look at it? I mean, I know there have been studies done, but I mean, how valuable is it to keep somebody out of school? Like, where is the value of that? I mean, we in a lot of ways we have not evolved over time with disciplinary tactics, but I think at this point in time, things have kind of rolled back a little bit, but I think there was a lot of innovative talk about readdressing the criminal justice system and how we treat low-level drug offenders. And I think in New Jersey, bail reform has taken place, and it needs to be tweaked, but I think it was the right thing to do, where we're taking people that we know have addictions, and they're not the problem. The problem is, to a large degree, the person with the firearm who may be running a narcotics operation that is feeding their addictions. And how do we get to the root? How do we get to the root cause of the addiction? I mean, and providing treatment options and things of this nature. Our jails are filled. They're bursting at the seams. I mean, we've seen in Camden County, we've seen a reduction, which we've had to work very hard at over the years. But it's still, I mean, if you go to places across this country to take a look at the jail system and the prison system, it's obscene. It's obscene how many people we have locked up. Actually, more people than anywhere else in the developed world. So anyway, I'll get off my soapbox about that, and you guys go on with.
Well, it's interesting too that your approach there, and no matter what platform or field that you're in, looking at it from a perspective or from an eye of a solution-oriented focus, to say, okay, what has been done and what have been the results? And if we continue to do it the way that we've been doing it, and I have this conversation on a daily basis with some of my students, they come in and I'll sit there and I'll listen to what they're saying. And, this is the fourth or fifth or sixth time I've heard this. And I say, what are you going to do differently?
Mm-hmm.
Right.
Because I'm telling you right now, what you're doing isn't working. So let's sit down and think about what a different approach might be to this and how you might get a different result. Because if you continue doing the same thing, you're going to continue to get the same result. Mm-hmm. So I think it's tremendous that you're laying this groundwork, you're paving a path, not just for the community that you're working in, but systematically and in a way that other people are taking a hard look at what you're doing and saying, holy smokes, there's something going on here, and this is different than what we've been seeing, and we need to take a hard look at this and begin to incorporate maybe a more open-minded approach to how we're going to solve some of the problems, some of the are really big problems and issues that we have out in our communities and just across the country.
I said there's no question. It's funny because I wanted to touch on this earlier, something you'd said about, the really the culture of organizations and really the companies that are successful and how they, there's a dialogue or communication and how important it is. And I think what I've seen, and I think this is all a catalyst to what you were saying, is that organizations, the successful ones that I've seen, are ones that can evolve and change.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
And they're able to, one tactic doesn't work, let's move to another one. Let's not keep doing the same thing. And the ones that do nothing are some of the worst. And that is there becomes a period of time when you have just become I don't want to call it lackadaisical, but I don't think there's the will to kind of change. And I'll give one quick example on this, and that is with the current heroin epidemic or opioid epidemic. The freeholder director, my boss, Lou Capelli, he this was front and center, right? We couldn't, none of us could, everybody knows somebody now. It's the way
Mm-hmm.
cancer was 30 years ago. Everybody knows somebody that's affected, whether it's a friend or a family member or an extended family member by it. And he didn't care how it got done, but he wanted it addressed. And he wanted the county to take an active role in providing treatment, maintenance, recovery, preserving recovery, meaning creating sports leagues for kids to focus on, because one of the things we forget about is that recovery is often dented by relapse, especially amongst opioid users. And quite frankly, 300 million opioids were prescribed. These are the oxys, the Percocets prescribed. That's one for every person in this country last year. And we had more overdose deaths than we did firearm deaths. So the freeholder director, he could have kept his mouth shut and did nothing and just kept going along, but he brought in law enforcement, he brought in the activists, he brought in medical professionals, and we created a task force that has been recognized as one of the more I'd say probably one of the more impactful groups, at least in the Northeast, with some of the things that we've put in place. And that is, and listen, that's not to say that this scourge isn't going to continue for a long period of time, because it will. And with the advent of fentanyl, which heroin's being cut with, more people are dying now. So he was at the forefront, and even a big place like Philadelphia looks to Camden County when it needs to get information on how to combat the opioid crisis.
Yeah, I think that's critical, that evolving. When you talked about evolving, we referenced about a month or so ago, the Penn State won a NCAA title as a team, and it was the 6 out of 7 years. And Cal Sanderson, who was at the helm, on his path to being considered an all-time great. His philosophy, and I actually have this on my own personal website in when I'm improving athletes' minds, working with athletes, is innovate and evolve, or you'll learn a quick and painful lesson from someone who has. And without that piece, you're stuck. You're kind of living in the past, and someone's flying by.
Without a doubt.
And that's very important to keep in mind. For all listeners out there, and just with that mindset and that mentality, which we'll have an opportunity to reflect on. That's something that we message in terms of living all in and incorporating that component and that mindset is critical.
As I'm just even thinking about evolving, how did you actually go from being a reporter to your role in Camden? Like, how did that transformation take place?
Yeah, so it's interesting. I mean, one of the newspapers that I grew up reading, and I still get in my driveway every morning, is the Philadelphia Inquirer, and all I really ever wanted to do was be a reporter for the Philadelphia Inquirer. I think they had an opening in the Trenton bureau. The Philadelphia Inquirer's had some significant challenges in regards to ownership stakes and everything else. So I make a long story short, I got a letter from the South Jersey editor at the time, and basically saying, hey, listen, we'd love for you to come in, but that position was just eliminated. So, for me, I still have that letter. I keep it at home, and it's a great reminder for kind of where the newspaper from a high of 500 employees maybe a decade ago, now down to half that, that they are still going through some very painful changes, I guess. But again, to make a long story short, I took that, and it was around the same time that Bernie Platt, who was the mayor of Cherry Hill, had just gotten rid of his communications director, and given me a call, inquired if I would be, if I had an interest, and I think looking at my surroundings at the time, I did. I wasn't necessarily sure where journalism was going to take me, and if I wanted to continue to, kind of slug away at what I was doing, which was really more of a covering local issues, which is great because it gave me a great background for moving into working for Cherry Hill, because I had talked to I talked to homeowners. I had a great understanding of what people were concerned about and what the issues of the day are. And that's for somebody who's, taking the kids to school, trying to get the trash out, is exhausted like I am every day. And, it maybe is listening to the Moana soundtrack in their car because, they forget to, they forget to turn off their kids' music after they drop them off. But I mean, it gave me this incredibly diverse background to go into become a professional public relations practitioner, and knowing exactly how we can frame things to make people understand them, and what the community is going to like, where we're going to have challenges. So I worked for the mayor I became his chief of staff, I think, in 2009, and then the county in 2010, I believe, started looking at options for a county police department, and I was contacted in 2011 to see if I had interest in possibly coming over and becoming the director of communications, but also focusing time and energy and resources into getting this very important police program off the ground. And it was a new challenge, and it was I don't want to say it was more than I bargained for, but it was a lot, and it's been a tremendous experience that I've been very happy with ever since.
And you don't have a criminal justice background or a degree, do you?
No, I mean, as a reporter, I'd covered crime before in Philadelphia, and I had an understanding, or somewhat of an understanding. And working in Cherry Hill, I had sat, I was with the mayor and the business administrator and their top attorney to pick out the new chief, and I had great experiences in law enforcement when I was in Cherry Hill, which gave me some background outside of my journalistic background, and then I became completely, and I have to thank everybody from John Timoney, God rest his soul, to Chief Scott Thompson, who I think is probably one of the most impressive, thoughtful public servants in the country. And so they've shaped me, and that shaping took place. I'm learning something new every day. I still do. That's why I love the job. And it's much like being a reporter to a certain degree. I mean, it's educational on so many different levels. We just did this program where we are taking rescue dogs into our jail to be trained by inmates, which gives them it gives them a new skill set for when they're released. It also probably cuts down, if they can get a job in the industry, on recidivism, them coming back. And then we take that trained dog and we give it to a veteran who may have PTSD or combat related issues. And I'm just not going to be able to do that, working for IBM. This is a really, it's been I've been content and really satisfied with this career path.
And I think it's wonderful to hear that. I mean, it's very inspirational that you, in seeking the truth and asking the questions, you were able to open your mind to those broader perspectives and understand what people were going through, so that you were then able to take that all in and kind of put that together into working with a service group that now needs to go back and service that community. So, I mean, it was such a unique position for you to be in, to be able to listen and hear with no strings attached. Like, you didn't have a stake when you were listening and hearing and gathering information all the way up and through, so that when those opportunities opened up to you, you were ready to just meet those opportunities. And that's a really unique situation to be in. I think that's wonderful.
It's unique, and people can go two ways. They can either embrace it or they can push it away, and if you're not willing to embrace it, there couldn't be two more disparate worlds. And this is changing, but there couldn't be two more disparate worlds than being in Cherry Hill and being in Camden City. Camden City is a place that I love, and it is so misunderstood, and it's mystifying to people because they don't actually know. They've just heard 30 years of bad headlines, and that's all they know. And I, as my father is a social worker who even to this day will now, starting on June 1st, go back to being a social worker and going out and visiting homes in Camden City. In this state program called JAX, he'll go and he'll do home visits with people. And my mom worked as a psych nurse on the 6th floor of Cooper Hospital. So Camden was always kind of part of our family, and to a certain degree was an employment center for us. But also, I remember going to Cooper as a kid. I remember when my dad started his career out as a social worker in the Board of Social Services right next to City Hall in Camden. For me, the city never had that stigma per se. But I think for a lot of the people I interact with who may live in the suburbs, maybe from outside of Camden, may have never gone to Camden, with the exception of maybe doing jury duty. They really have no understanding of how wonderful the city is, and it's getting better day by day. $3 billion of new investment in the city over the last 3 years. All these new corporate entities building, and small business owners expanding. Subaru of America, Holtec International, the largest indoor vegetation, for bok choy and all these different kales and arugula, that's going to be located in Camden. They're going to break ground on that soon. But Liberty Property Trust coming in, it's things are changing, and my personal goal is to change the overall perception of the city in the suburbs. And it's going to become a place where we're going to see 5,000 to 10,000 new employees coming in, and a lot of them are going to be coming in from the suburbs to work in Camden. So the largest employer in Camden County, and one of the largest probably in the state of New Jersey is Cooper Hospital. So it's my personal goal has been not only to ensure that the police department is well represented, but also to make sure that people know that there are really good things going on in the city.
Back in the 90s, I read a book called Savage Inequality. The author is escaping me right now, but talking about the disparity in cities to local suburbs. And that book specifically talked about Camden to Cherry Hill, but then other cities also around the country. So it's hopeful to hear, even though it is decades later, and I feel like it's just starting to move, that there is that progress being made, and hopefully some other cities in the country can follow suit.
So I pay very close attention to the headlines. I pay very close, and I have since I was younger, and I can tell you this is probably the most unadulterated, consistent period of time that the city has had one good thing happen after another, and that has not been the case since the 1970s. Since businesses started pulling out, 1961 with New York Shipbuilding Company, to RCA, to Campbell's Soup, and all those manufacturing giants leaving, this has been the only period of time. And you ask people, and we've done qualitative research. We know I've seen it done. I've been on the other side of the glass. People know some good things are going on, but people's overall perception is that it's still a dangerous place. And quite frankly, in my experience, it's dangerous if you're going in to buy drugs or sex or some other ill-gotten gain. It's not dangerous for people coming in to go to Donkey's and get a cheesesteak, or to shop on Broadway, or going to the Sixers practice facility. 76ers have decided to take $1 million athletes, and those athletes are now spending an inordinate amount of time, the majority of their time, in Camden. So, they practice a lot more than they play games.
Yeah, and I think that you've those grassroots efforts, that change that you've been a huge part of along the way, whether it's through the police department and just the Camden County at large, that I think becomes wide. It moves into different. It becomes a life of its own, essentially. And when the people start to see things differently and handle differently, and everybody is invested in this piece, and who's to say that these corporate giants, so to speak, might not even take a look, without these other things happening. So it becomes across the board. It starts to seep in other areas, or seep out in other ways as we continue to evolve, and as you continue to evolve and provide this kind of effective leadership for this community, and continue to kind of build and grow as a community and evolve as a community, in the position that you have. It's tremendous to hear it, because it starts there, and when you can look at that model, that there's, we're doing this, relationships and trust and leadership, and providing a system, and asking tough questions and seeking the truth, no different than anything that any of our listeners out there wouldn't do in pursuing whatever it is that they're involved in, whether it's their profession or just them personally, in their lives. The system remains the same, and to hear it changing and evolve at such a big national level, it's a testament that if it can happen at that level, if we look inside and internal and are honest and truthful with ourselves and where we're at and what we want, and can ask ourselves the tough questions personally, that we too can evolve into essentially anything that we want to be or to do, in our lives, which is really the message that we're trying to get out in terms of living all in our lives, what we're discussing, week to week.
So before we close up, I did want to ask, when I asked you 2 words to describe yourself, you said driven and disparate. So is that right? Disparate?
That couldn't be. What's that?
So, well, tell me.
So,
tell me more.
Maybe driven is. Let's start there, right?
Yeah.
That's a good one. I think ultimately I have, and this goes back. So I'll take it all the way back to the beginning. Here goes back to my father telling me that if what is the worst thing somebody can say, and that is no. So always ask the question.
Yeah.
That doesn't. I mean that goes for everything, right? Like, are you hiring? Yes or no, right? I mean, very very simple things. But I think, that is if somebody can keep that in the back of their head, that will drive them to ultimately get to a place where they start to hear yes more.
Yeah.
And ultimately, I think driven. I am by. Unfortunately, I don't know if it's my genetic makeup or what. I'm a workaholic. I just I try to be as dependable as possible with people, which means that I'm on all the time, and that may be my phones, and I do this. My wife and my child probably don't love that aspect, but it has helped me get to where I am today, and I'm going to continue to push the limits as far as I can with going back to that word driven, because there's I'm 39, and it's this job in itself is not a 9-to-5 job, right? It's something that unfortunately we could have a homicide at any time, or a shooting, and I could get called at 2 a.m., 3 a.m. I've put press releases out at 3 a.m. in the morning based on an officer-involved shooting. But, driven is that, I think you're always looking for the next challenge, and you want to make sure that stays fresh. And then you can keep yourself fresh, because you never want to get to a certain degree in a place where you're not being challenged. That's that can come to a place where you're just not going to be satisfied or happy.
Yeah, I think that's a great message to leave our listeners with. Absolutely, that's wonderful.
Yeah, you clearly are, an innovator, right?
Oh,
an inspiration, a leader, doing such tremendous work in the community, just for people at large. It's truly an inspiration, and you are a pioneer, I would say.
Listen, let me before you go any further, let me just say, and I want to make sure this is clear, that the police officers, every public servant I work with, they make my job that much easier. They're the ones that deserve the credit, and they're the ones that we like to highlight, because they are doing God's work out there. They're the guys walking the beat every day, guys, folks working in the health department, the folks that are working to keep people safe, the guys working in the dispatch room. They're really the unsung heroes of Camden County, and that's why I do what I do, because we get a chance to let people know that, and we get a chance to let them tell their story, and it's one of my primary jobs too. But I didn't want that to go by the wayside. They are
agreed.
They are the backbone of everything that goes on.
It's a culture. It's a community.
Without doubt.
Everybody's an integral piece.
So listeners, thank you so much for tuning into our show tonight. We hope that you found a takeaway from tonight's episode and can incorporate this mindset into your own life. So until next time, get out there and start living your life all in.